Hello, everyone. Sorry, I started a little bit late. We're, I guess, really close to the start of class. I was trying to get my headphones set up. Hopefully, can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you. All right. I hope you guys are all doing well. I can't believe we've made it to the last class, the last official class. That's pretty crazy. So if you didn't know, today is the last class meeting. And then Monday is optional. It's not really part of a class. It's not like a lecture or anything. So this is our last time we're actually like learning Python together, at least. You can continue to learn.
Looks like time has flown by pretty fast.
Yeah, it has. All right, I'm gonna get everything. Okay, get all set up. Okay, so as our last class for like the extra topics, most people were interested in learning how to debug their code. So we'll be talking about that today. Make sure this is recording. Yep, it is. All right. Okay, so debugging. We're going to be using Replit, but it's not super necessary for you to follow along and code with me because I'll be showing you like errors and we'll be reading error messages, but feel free to also type along in Replit. As I mentioned before, we have the bonus meeting on Monday. Class is over after this one, but we're going to talk about neurodiversity on Monday if you're interested in that. So bring questions or topics for discussion and stuff. Should be fun. Much less formal, or I mean, this isn't very formal either, but no pressure at all, just a fun discussion. And like I said, today is the last class, so we're going to talk about debugging. I wanted to talk about working with data in Python because that is what I do, and some people were interested in learning what I do. I don't think we'll really have enough time for that, but I did put in the link to a tutorial that you could follow if you were interested in that. And if we have time, maybe I'll go through the tutorial a little bit to get you started. So before we get into debugging, are there any questions? Probably not, but I don't know, maybe. Just check the Discord. All right, well, so debugging. This is just a fancy way to say fixing your code, making it do things right. So you can debug by reading the Python error messages. So a lot of you have experienced, probably all of us have experienced, typing some code into Python and then some red text, sometimes it's red, sometimes it's not, pops up and it says error and it stops working and you're not sure why. So we can actually read these error messages. They're not as scary as they look. They're actually very informative. You can read those errors and figure out what's wrong with your code. Sometimes you just need to evaluate your code in your head, just reading it, kind of like the logic exercises that we did where we tried to predict if the if statement would run or not. Evaluating the code in your head, check for typos, like if you missed a colon or if you forgot to indent or call a function or something, and then as a last resort, but something that all programmers do, Google the solution. It's not cheating. I mean, you can Google anything these days. A lot of programmers Google if you just have looked at your code and you're like, I can't figure out what's wrong with it. Nothing wrong with Googling it. I'll share some tips on that as well. Okay, so first of all, how do we read these Python error messages? They look very scary. But Python is actually telling us what's wrong. And sometimes they're very long. If you are unfortunate enough to have a very long error message, you have to scroll a bit, but the most useful information is in the last line of the error message. So right here. So if this was longer or something, like let's say it went all the way up here and it was super long, what we would do is we go to the very last line of the message and we check what this says. So in our case, it says indentation error, expected an indented block. So this is actually telling us exactly what's wrong, which is very nice. It says indentation error. So we need to check our indentation. And if you look, this is the code that it's running. Sorry, forgot to mention that. So this is the code. And then we can look for even some more information. The line directly above the name of the error tells you what line the error is on. So it says file. So in case you have multiple files going, which you most likely won't at this stage of your Python journey, but maybe later. So say file, what file it's in, and then the line number. And so you can actually see the line 5, and it says here. So it's not, it has this little pointer here at print A. It's not going to point to any specific character. It's just pointing at the line. So, but anyway, so we know that the error is in line 5. And if we look at line 5, we can see we have our if statement, and it needs to be indented here. So then we can fix it, and now the code works. So if I ran this code, it would do exactly what it's supposed to. So that's just like a basic overview of how to read these Python error messages. And I have another example here. So what about this one? Does someone want to put in the chat or tell me what is this Python error telling us? Yeah, you can't divide by 0. So if we look at the very last line here, it says 0 division error, division by 0. So somewhere we're dividing by 0. Next, we can go up above here and it will tell us that the error is on, it says file main.py is line 5. And it'll even tell you what function it's in if you defined a function. But anyway, it tells us line 5, so we can go over to line 5 and see our error. Now I want to point something out to you. So it says line 5 here. Up here, it says line 7, and that can be confusing sometimes if you're just getting started reading these error messages. That is what Python calls, you can see it's labeled traceback. Traceback is just where Python goes kind of line by line and seeing where an error occurred. So in this case, it's saying line 7 because that's where you actually call main, and main is the function that has the error in it. So you don't want to look at this one too much. You want to look at here where the error actually is, which is line 5. And if the way that Python lists these doesn't really make sense to you or why it lists them in that order, just know that typically you want to look at the last line that the message lists. So in this case, we have our 0 division error, and right above it, it tells us the line that this is on. So in our case, that's line 5. And in fact, I did divide by 0. I have a equals 5, and then b equals a minus 5, which is 0. Now we have c equals a divided by b, which is 5 divided by 0, and that is not allowed. So if we wanted to change it, we could just change it to maybe a minus b or something, and this runs perfectly fine with no errors. So that's kind of just a slideshow version of how you can go through these error messages. And I also have some Replit examples that we can go through together. I think it's on a separate tab, so I'll move them over. All right, so here's the one that I just showed. Hopefully you can see my Replit screen right now. All right, so you can ignore what it has here right for now. So because this is not main.py in Replit, I'm going to be going over to shell and running it like this, where you type out like Python 3 example1.py. So that's how I'll be running this. But I have my code here. I have a equals input, enter your age. So the user will enter their age. And then I made this variable b that is a plus 10. So if I run this, enter your age, I'm going to say 100. And now we have this error message. So does someone want to take a guess at what is wrong in our code? Yeah, great job. So we didn't turn the string into an integer. And yeah, exactly. We should put int input over here. And if you read this and you weren't really sure what this meant, this whole can only concatenate string, not int, to string, you can look at type error. Type error just means that you have tried to do some sort of operation with mismatching types. So either a string and an int or a string and a float, something like that. And if we still weren't sure, we could look at, it says the file, and then the line number is line 4. Go over to line 4 and we see b equals a plus 10. It says one of these is a string and one of these is an int. So we can change this up here to convert it to an int. And now if we run it, 100, and it's fine. So that's this example. Are there any questions over this example or what we've talked about so far? Yes, Raj.
So is debugging like the same in all programming languages in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. So the error messages will be different just based on the language and how whoever made the language decided to write out error messages, but it will pretty much give you these error messages where it'll give the type of the error, and then it'll give some sort of description and usually a line number. So yeah, this is good to use across any programming language. The way that they write it may be a bit different. So like they may define different kinds of errors than Python does, but yeah, that's a really good question. So yes, I would say you can use this in other languages too. Any other questions? Okay, let's look at another example. So in this one, I define a list. I'm going to clear this output up here. Okay, so in this one, I define a list. My list equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I say print my list 4. So if I run this, Python 3, what is this called? Example 2. Here's our error message. And in this one, it says index error, list index out of range. Does anyone have an idea what this might mean? Okay, yeah, that is, yes, right. Sorry, Yasher says if you want to print 4, you should put my list 3. But what specifically is wrong with how we did this? So let's just say I didn't care what number I was printing. I just wanted to print something. So yes, 3 would be the correct thing to put here, but why is 4 wrong? Okay, we got no takers on that one. That's okay. So 4 is wrong because we don't have an index 4. We have, so we start at 0, remember? So we say 0, 1, 2, 3. There's no 4. And Python does not like it when you try to access index 4 out of a list that only has up to index 3. So if we change this, so let's go back to our error message. It says list index out of range. So this is telling us the index you're trying to access for the list is out of range of the available indexes or indices. And if we go up here, it tells us the line that it's on, and it's on line 4, which is over here. So if we changed this to 3, then that would be okay because we have 0, 1, 2, 3. So if we run this again, now it's okay. It'll print 4. The same error message would happen if you had anything greater than the indexes available. So if we had like 10 or so, ooh, wrong place to type that, 10 or something, then this error would appear again because there's not 10 slots in our list. So we could print 1. Okay, so are there any questions about this one? Okie doke, I'm not seeing any questions come in. I think the third one, we need to go back to the slides. Okay, yep, the third one, we go back to the slides. Okay, so now another type of error that some people get doesn't even seem like an error because Python doesn't print any error message. And this will happen when Python is interpreting your code in a way that you didn't expect. Usually this means that maybe you didn't indent something correctly, or you typed the wrong variable name when you meant another one. Basically, there's nothing technically wrong with your code, but it's not doing what you want. So you can follow a couple of steps to fix this. You can read through your code very slowly, line by line, and evaluate it in your head and try to figure out what is going on and compare that to what you want the code to do. Next, you need to check if you made the proper function calls. So the one that I see the most often is when you define main and then you don't call main at the very end of your script, where we have main and then open and close parentheses. Or you accidentally indented your function call so that it becomes part of the function definition. Make sure that when you call main, it's in the right spot and that you do call main. And then last, check your indentation. And I would add on to this, check your indentation and check your colons. Like when we have our if statements and we have the colon, or a loop and we have the colon at the end, always make sure you have those. Indentation and colons are tricky and they're easy to miss. So if we want to look at an example similar to that, we're going to, oh, not run it, sorry. All right, so next we're going to do Python 3, example 3.py. I'm going to run this and nothing happens. What is wrong? What is wrong with my code? Yeah, exactly. Main. We didn't call main. Great job, everyone. So we need to go back down here and we need to say main. And then this will run. And I say enter number 10, number is even. Now, if we had entered main like here or something where we're not aligned with this definition, it's inside it, this would also not run. And I have actually seen this a lot over the summer. Some people accidentally indented this, probably because Replit automatically indents things for you, but make sure it's unindented. All right, so that is that one. I think I have another one for this section. Okay, so this one, the goal of this program is to print correct if A is less than 10 and A is even. So based on this code, we're going to assume there's an error because I wrote it to have an error. But let's see, if we run it, what is wrong here? So it seems to be okay. But if I change it to, so if it's less than 10 and as even, so if I change it to be greater than 10, why does it still say correct? Anyone have any guesses? Okay, we have some guesses. We have there's no else after. Yes, I see it. Yes. So the second if should be indented. Great catch. It was a little hard to see. So we had a couple guesses and those were good guesses. It says there's no else statement. That's okay. We didn't really need one in this case. But if we wanted it to print correct only if a is less than 10 and it's even, we need to nest these if statements so that it needs to be indented. So now if we run it and we have 8 equals 1,000, it shouldn't print anything. And yes, so those were good guesses. So they were all technically right. But the reason that it wasn't working is because it needed to be indented. And yes, I got a question on using the shell. So I've talked about this a little bit before, but when you have extra scripts here, you can't press the run button because Replit only runs files called main.py. But to run a Python script, really anywhere, what you type in the shell is Python 3 and then the name of the file, and then enter, and that will run your script. So if you have Python on your computer and you have access to a terminal, you can use this to run Python. But I'm doing it here because Replit only runs main.py. Is there a line that can run a command in the shell to then run a script? Do you mean in Python? Yeah, there is. So when we talked about libraries last week, a library that you can use is called OS. And you can import OS. And then the command is like os dot. It's something, I would have to look it up, but there is, OS is what you would use, and you can use that to then send commands to the shell. And yes, you can send a command to run your script. But I have a feeling that would just keep running your script. So maybe not good to do it on your same script, but. Yeah, you can do, yeah, no, what I mean is that you can use the OS module to run any shell command. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea for Replit. So you're saying that if I did, sorry everyone, this is getting off topic, but that's okay. I just wanted to answer this question. You can import OS, and then you can use OS to do your command. And yeah, you could run all of these if you wanted, but I don't mind doing this. Okay, so which one did we just look at? Number 4? Yeah, so we wanted to indent this, and now it works. So are there questions about this problem or anything that we've talked about so far? I just have one more live example, and then we can look at some others. Yes, Raj.
So when there's like an error code, you can kind of like Google that and try to find out. But like when there's no error code and like you check if there's ints and colons, like is there any like online resource that you could use?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, so 2 things. So you pointed out that if you have an error message and you don't know what it means, you can always Google it. You just copy paste into Google. If there's no error message, so like when we had this and it wasn't working right because it wasn't indented, Yeah, it's harder to Google, but what I would do is, so if I were going to Google this one specifically, so we want to print correct if a is less than 10 and is even, you usually start out, make sure that it knows you want Python, and then you can say how to print something if two statements are true. So something like that, like you can kind of put in just a simple version of what you want to do and what's not working. And then usually the first one that pops up will be Stack Overflow. That's a really good one. Let's click on this. So someone says, I want to print one thing if two things are true and another if either is false. And they have some stuff. Whoops, there's a curse word on there, sorry. And then people will answer it and it'll say, so they suggested using the and keyword, and that also works. So let's see, multiple if statements. So this one was this person is asking about nesting if statements. So and then they can use or statements and stuff like that. So it wasn't that. Oops, that's necessary. But yeah, so that's how I would go about Googling a problem. So I hope that made sense. If you have more questions about it, let me know. I think I have some tips in here. Maybe I don't. Yeah, okay. All right, so we talked about when there's no error message to go through these. And then finally, you can Google. So if you aren't sure how to fix your code, Google it like we just did. You type in Python and then what you want your code to do, usually with like a how-to. And some good websites that are pretty reputable for looking at Python code, Stack Overflow. That is basically like a forum where people answer your questions and then the best ones are upvoted. It's a really good resource. I know it sounds weird because it's like public and so anyone can answer, but it's actually very good. Some professional programmers use it. And sometimes there are some like very famous programmers that will just answer questions on there. W3 Schools is a very good resource as well. They are very good for most anything internet related or programming wise. And then Geeks for Geeks, which I used to use all the time, but I think now you can only use it, you can only visit their website like 3 times a day, or else you have to buy a subscription or something. I don't know. But that's good if you can access it. So those are the 3 that I would recommend. And basically, yeah, you would just Google. So let's say I don't remember how to break out of a loop. So I could say Python how to end a loop. And there's a couple that pop up. LearnPython.com, that's fine. I usually just look for, yeah, like Stack Overflow or W3 Schools. And so then if we looked at the Stack Overflow one, someone is saying, I'm new to programming, playing around with Python scripting. It says, how do I get it so that the loop will stop? And then we have some answers here where people will put some example code and answer the question stuff. So. Okay. So now, I didn't prepare any of you for this, but does anyone have some code that they wrote that maybe isn't working, or they have, okay, Donovan is volunteering. Okay, yeah, great. So we'll go, we'll try to keep it to maybe like 5 minutes or less per person, but I'd love to go through if you have code and you're not really sure. Yeah, let me, I need to enable screen sharing. But yeah, if anyone has code that they have and they're like, there's an error, I don't know what it is, I don't know why it is, we can all try to work on it together. So and I'll stop recording, or I'll pause the recording.